Good evening from New York. Just hours ago, the governor of Arizona signed into law an immigration bill that may, in practical terms, mandate racial profiling. And only hours before that, President Obama had criticized the proposed law and used it as an example of why federal-level immigration reform is so necessary and urgent. In our fifth story tonight, will this new law do for immigration reform what outrageous insurance rate hikes did for health care reform? Governor Brewer today signed into law and then defended a law that allows Arizona police to stop anyone on site and ask them to produce papers proving that they are in the country legally if the officer has a reasonable suspicion that the person may be in the country illegally. The law would take effect 90 days after the state legislative session ends, meaning by August of this year, unless it is enjoined. The latitude the new measure gives police is a crucial component, one that has been vigorously criticized by the bill's opponents. Governor Brewer, who will be facing a primary challenge from a handful of fellow Republicans this August, framed her decision as a matter of security and law enforcement. The governor said her state had waited patiently for Washington to act amid a dangerous and unacceptable situation, and she claimed that no one else's civil rights would be violated.
My signature today represents my steadfast support for enforcing the law, both against illegal immigration and against racial profiling. This legislation mirrors federal laws regarding immigration enforcement. I will not tolerate racial discrimination or racial profiling in Arizona. Today, I am issuing an executive order directing the Arizona Peace Officers Standards and Training Board, AZ Post, to develop training to appropriately implement Senate Bill 1070. Importantly, this training will include what does and does not constitute reasonable suspicion that a person is not legally present in the United States.
Earlier today, at a naturalization ceremony for 24 active duty service members, the president called for comprehensive immigration reform and took the opportunity to critique the Arizona bill.
Indeed, our failure to act responsibly at the federal level will only open the door to irresponsibility by others. And that includes, for example, the recent efforts in Arizona, which threaten to undermine basic notions of fairness that we cherish as Americans, as well as the trust between police and their communities that is so crucial to keeping us safe. In fact, I've instructed members of my administration to closely monitor the situation and examine the civil rights and other implications of this legislation. But if we continue to fail to act at a federal level, we will continue to see misguided efforts opening up around the country.
Opponents of that misguided Arizona immigration measure include Arizona's Attorney General Terry Goddard and New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Catholic bishops oppose the law. Reverend Jim Wallace of the progressive Christian group Sojourners has said in a statement that churches will not comply with it for moral reasons. Congressman Raul Grijalva, who had called for an economic boycott of his own state if the bill became law, he called for it on this newscast on Tuesday, which today reiterated that position to Countdown through his office. The primary focus of the boycott would be the state's convention centers. Senator John McCain of Arizona, who, like Governor Brewer, is in his own primary battle for re-election, has supported the measure. And while McCain said it would be regrettable if the legislation led to racial profiling, he also said that the law was written to protect, quote, people whose homes and property are being violated, drivers of cars with illegals in them that are intentionally causing accidents on the freeways. Protesters who had camped out at the Arizona State Capitol for days in opposition to this bill reacted to the governor's act, the signing today, with boos and chants of shame on you. Joining me now, Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez of California's 47th District. Great, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me tonight.
Governor Brewer says racial profiling is illegal, it will not be tolerated, and yet almost anybody who would be guilty under this law will necessarily be Hispanic. It would seem to me that these two statements are mutually exclusive.
Well, more importantly, I believe the governor has tolerated it. We've seen that they have a Mariposa County sheriff there who's under investigation by our Justice Department and our FBI because while they're allowed 287G, it's a provision in federal law that says if we train you and you are a law enforcement officer and you agree with a memorandum of understanding to act as immigration officials, and if you do it right, you can, in fact, get these people and get them to ICE, and we can work on deporting them. But what we've seen is that they haven't been trained. They haven't. They're almost like vigilantes out there getting people, and so it's happening in her own state, and that's why we have an investigation against that. So for her to say she won't tolerate it, well, I would say, Madam Governor, it's happening. It's happening, and now you've signed a law that, if you really read it, says someone like Loretta Sanchez, a Hispanic, goes into Arizona. Now, what type of credentials am I supposed to carry with me? What, you know, and the other night, last night, I had one of my colleagues say, we can tell they're just different.
Right.
Well, what do you mean? Well, they dress differently. They even wear different shoes. You know, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's madness.
It really is a crazy thing to see.
All right, but now let me ask you the devil's advocate question. There is a serious problem, specifically in Arizona. There are people being kidnapped in Phoenix by Mexican drug cartels, people just driving straight across the border and pulling people out of homes and taking them back to Mexico and holding them for money. These are not imaginary problems. They may not be a million per 2 million cases, but they are happening. So what is the solution if this so clearly is not the solution?
Well, the first thing that is a solution is that we need to handle the immigration issue. What does that mean? We believe it's three-pronged. I believe it's a three-pronged solution. First, understand who's to come into our country and who's not. We have the sovereign right to decide that. Make the borders, you can't have 100% complete tightness on the border, but you can do a pretty good job. And we've been trying to do that. We've been allocating the resources. I have more than twice as many Border Patrol agents as I had just 2 years ago in our federal service. So we're working very hard to get the security. But remember, there's a lot of people passing, and there's a reason why they're coming to the United States. It's an economic reason. So I would say, let's make visas that allow people to come if we have jobs available for them to come, so that they're not being sneaking into our country or running across our country or giving money to those people who would profit from a smuggling trade. Because where there's smuggling, there's forging of documents, there's laundering of money, there's possible terrorists who could be smugged in the same lines. There's definitely drug dealing going on. So bad people are profiting because we as a government have not stood up and said, let's make a good program where people who need to work can come because we need workers. And lastly, let's just say that the third piece of enforcement of visas for the future, and what do we do about the people who are already here? We need to do something about that, because when we take care of that, then we've taken the big haystack away, and we're really just dealing with the criminal element we're talking about.
This effort in Arizona right now that was pushed through the Senate and the State House there and was signed by the governor today, do you think this is a sincere but misguided effort to address the problem, or is this some politicians like Governor Brewer or Senator McCain who are being challenged from their own right sides, people more conservative even than they are conservative, and they're just making political hay out of this? Which do you think it is? Well,
I personally don't know the governor, so I can't attest to her. I do know, I believe, John McCain very well. I've been 14 years in the Congress while he's been a senator. He understands there needs to be a comprehensive immigration reform done. You know, the guy who's running against him, J.D. Hayworth, I served with. I don't want to see J.D. Hayworth in that position, and I understand that people are angry in Arizona, some of the, especially people who vote, because they do get scared. They are scared about this. They are worried about so many people coming, coyotes as we call them, bringing people in. They're worried about terrorists. They're worried. They're just worried, and they see it infringing their lifestyle. I understand that. We can handle that. But as I said, we have to have a comprehensive package. So I would just hope that Senator McCain gets through that primary and then gets back to the business of really governing. And that means we need to pass an immigration reform. Let me just add one other thing that really worries me. And this comes from my law enforcement. Now, some people say, oh, the cops want this, law enforcement want this. The police chiefs of my area, do not want to have an immigrant community, the Hispanic community or the Arab American community or the Russian American community or the Vietnamese community. They want to have good relationships with these immigrant communities. When you begin to shut down a community because their people may not have the status, therefore they don't want to interact with the police, then criminals can hide within those communities, even criminals who are not part of that community.
Yeah, that becomes a new self-feeding problem that can replace the problem they think they're fixing.
And then there's more crime.
Exactly.
So my police officials actually are against these types of situations.
Congresswoman Laura Sanchez of the California 47th, again, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for your opinions on this.